Hello, Cindy Olin here with Create Your Own Luck and Love, and welcome to yet again. We are talking about leveling up your love life, removing the blocks that are standing in the way of, creating and attracting the extraordinary lasting love that you really get to have. And I'm so excited to introduce my very special guest, Samantha Burns. We were just talking beforehand. I've not interviewed her yet. And so I'm really excited that we get to play today and dive into a really important topic. But, first I'm going to just tell you a little bit about her, and so that you know the context that we're who I'm talking about here. So she is known as the millennial love expert. She's a licensed counselor, dating coach, author of 2 books, a mom. You're a busy lady. That's what I'm saying. Breaking up and bouncing back, moving on to create the love and life you deserve, and Done with Dating, 7 Steps to Find Your Person. So as a leading love expert in the industry, you're often requested to decode dating behavior. Ooh. And your work has been featured in Women's Health, Cosmopolitan, Huffington Post, Elite Daily, Reader's Digest, Boston Globe, and many, many more. And I know you work with clients across the country for dating, breakup, relationship coaching, and you also offer a 12-week breakup recovery program. Whew, that is
me in a nutshell.
And I know, say all that in one breath. That's great. Well, welcome. I'm excited to have you here with us today. And I know we're going to talk about attachment styles and, the intricacies around that. Can't even say the word. But so maybe we should just start with, what are attachment styles?
Sure. I love this topic. And I think attachment styles, and I know that it's almost become like a hot buzzword, like people are starting to really incorporate this and understand it in their dating lives, but so much of it is still unknown. And it's always something I say, like, if you don't tackle and understand and work on your attachment styles, no matter if you put the perfect partner in front of you, no matter if they have all the qualities you're looking for and you share all the core values, if you're on conflicting sides of the attachment style spectrum, it's probably not going to work, at least without not a lot of help. So basically, attachment styles are ultimately your level of comfort with closeness and intimacy, and it's the way your brain perceives whether your partner feels safe and emotionally available, or like inconsistent and unreliable and a lot of highs and lows and kind of emotionally shut off or unavailable. So that's kind of the big picture of what attachment styles are. And then I would love to talk about, there's basically 3 types. The 4th type is a combination of 2 of the types. So I'm going to cover broadly the 3 types of attachment styles, and hopefully for people listening, they can very clearly identify with one style. And of course, we can have little traits of multiple kinds, but you'll probably fall into one category. So is it helpful if I just dive into the type?
I'm going to let you just dive right in.
Yeah. So attachment theory, and it's a theory that's existed for a long time in the psychology world. And traditionally, it really focused on caregiver and child relationships, but then you can actually apply it to adult romantic relationships. So the broad view of, I'll describe a little bit about each type and what it happens in early childhood, but then we're going to talk about it in adult romantic relationships, because what's important to know is your attachment style can shift with time and different relationship and life experiences. So not everything in life is this big, like, psychoanalytic daddy issue, mommy issue thing. It can stem from there, but we can have like traumatic and really tumultuous relationship experiences that shift our attachment style, even if we had like a healthy, happy childhood with like emotionally available caregivers. So I just like to preface that. So the first type of your attachment style that we'll focus on is called your secure attachment style. So secure is really like the gold standard of what we're aiming for in your adult romantic relationship, and also if you're a parent or going to be raising kids. So your secure attachment style basically occurs when your primary caregiver, when you were a child, was very emotionally available. They were sensitive to your needs. They were attuned to your emotions. They were there to support you. They were present. They gave you independence and autonomy so that you could like go off on your way and explore the world. But if you were scared or you needed comfort, they were there to like hold you and make you feel good. And this in turn, as an adult, creates an adult who is very confident, who is very kind of emotionally stable, who is very secure in expressing their feelings, their emotions, communicating about relationship issues. They're quite vulnerable in the sense that these are the people who will tell you when you're dating that they like you, even if they don't know how you feel about them. So they spend less time worrying like, does she like me? Does he like me? And really just like in tune with their own feelings and confidently able to say, hey, I really like you. I'm having a great time. Like, I want to continue seeing you. So when you're dating someone with a secure style, there's not a lot of guessing as to how they feel because they're pretty upfront and communicate with you openly. Right. In a committed relationship, they're really good at kind of turning towards you to repair conflict. So they're not going to shy away or blow up in anger. They're the type of people who have like a teammate mentality. So they're the people who are saying like, we're in this together. We're going to work through this. They validate your emotions. They compromise. They ask for their needs and what they want. So they're like really good partners. And that's kind of your job when dating or in a relationship is to model these secure styles or traits and qualities, and then also ideally seek out a partner who has a secure attachment style, because it will just make life feel easier when you have a teammate who can also communicate easily about relationship issues, who isn't afraid of intimacy, who like wants closeness, and who makes a really good teammate. So that's secure, and that's what we're aiming for. The other types of attachment styles, one is called your anxious attachment style. So someone with an anxious attachment style, likely in early childhood, their caregiver wasn't always present or attuned or available because maybe they worked and they had a profession and they were busy, or they struggled with substance abuse issues or like other big life issues like poverty, things that just get in the way of being a totally present caregiver. And so you as a child learn that if basically you were like clingy and needy enough, eventually your needs would get met. So you learn to be pretty persistent. And then as you get older, you also learn you kind of seek attention either through acting out or by like excelling at things. So like being really good in school and getting straight A's, or being a standout like sports star or, instrument player, something that you think will elicit like praise and approval and love from your caregiver. And so you realize like you need to be kind of clingy and needy, and that ultimately people with an anxious attachment style kind of struggle with a sense of feeling good enough, of feeling worthy enough, of feeling lovable. And so they're always seeking like that closeness and feeling like that they matter and feeling like that they're a priority and that they want to, they feel like having a partner will complete them in some way where they might feel a little empty inside of that like unlovable or unworthy or not good enough need to be met. And so in adult romantic relationships, people who have an anxious attachment style, there's a number of traits and qualities. So things like, first, dating can cause a lot of anxiety where you're constantly like overanalyzing, overthinking, spending a lot of your time and energy like wondering what your partner's thinking. Are they going to call you? Do they like you? And, you're anxiously waiting by your phone. If you go to send a text, you're going to like spend an hour crafting the perfect message because you don't want to say the wrong thing and scare them away. Or if they don't text you back right away, you can be on edge and feel like your world is kind of revolving around that person until you know that the relationship is like safe, or you hear from them and know like where they stand in terms of wanting to go on another date with you. You can have a lot of like insecurity both in yourself. So like, am I good enough? and you can insert any adjective there. Am I pretty enough, smart enough, like funny enough, wealthy enough, successful enough, good enough in bed, like whatever it might be. But also a lot of insecurity in the relationship. So constantly worrying, like, do they like me? Are they going to leave me? These people fear kind of abandonment and rejection a lot. They also have a lot of insecurities around like infidelity, being cheated on, being left for another person. Some self-worth issues, self-esteem issues around like feeling attractive enough. And then also, they don't like to rock the boat because they ultimately fear rejection. These people in relationships aren't very good at communicating their like needs and wants because they feel like they have so much of them that they don't want to be viewed as like too much or too needy or too intense, which they might sometimes get that feedback, or in an argument they're like a lot of drama. Sometimes they intentionally cause drama or kind of stir the pot because they want to see that their partner cares and that their partner is there for them. And so yeah, there can be a lot of dynamics that make dating and kind of forming a relationship really challenging. Like ultimately this type wants closeness and wants love, and they almost feel desperate for it. And they constantly feel like almost like their love tank is running on empty and like they can't get enough of it. So that's the anxious style. And then on the exact opposite side of the spectrum is the avoidant attachment style. So an avoidant attachment style can form in early childhood where basically you're neglected as a kid, your caregiver isn't present, and your needs go unmet. So you learn from a very early age that people are not dependable, you're not reliable, that you have to basically meet your own needs and depend on yourself. So you become a very independent person early on, and almost as like a protective mechanism, you just like to rely on yourself. So as an adult in romantic relationships, you tend to be very emotionally distant, kind of evasive. You ultimately, I mean, all humans like want and desire love and connection. So these people want love, but they don't really know how to get it. And it makes them uncomfortable, and too much intimacy and too much closeness feels suffocating. So they feel and often worry that like they have to give up their independence in order to be in a relationship, or they feel like their freedom is being encroached upon, or they feel like, their partners are just too needy or want too much from them. And so they sabotage. These are the people that maybe you go on 3 great dates and then they ghost you and you don't know what happened to them, or it's like a step forward, 2 steps back. They don't call or text consistently. Maybe you send them like a whole long text message about your day and they give you like a 1-word response. They just are a little bit cold, but it's really kind of a push and pull dynamic. So initially, when it's new and exciting and you're dating and someone's getting to know you, you might not pick up on these traits because you're still like at a distance enough where they're learning about you. There's no real commitment. It's fun. They seem all in. They seem available. But as the relationship progresses and as you get closer and closer and start, planning your days together and your weekends together and your life together, then that's maybe when you notice some behaviors like the pulling away or distancing. And that can be physically being distant, withdrawing, like physical affection or sex, but it could also be just emotionally distant where they don't really seem present. They have a lot of difficulty communicating about relationship issues. So if there is a conflict, these are the people who will shut down, avoid, ignore, or like blow up in anger. And one pattern that I've also seen with avoidance is something called gaslighting, which for me is like a form of emotional abuse where these people are really good at manipulating you to feel like, whether intentionally or not, like they're good at making you feel like somehow you're wrong for having your emotional experiences, and like you wind up apologizing to them. That's actually like one of the anxious avoidant dynamics that we could talk about. But so they struggle to really, communicate about relationship issues. And that can make it hard, for the relationship to like stay together ultimately long term.
So I have a question for you, going back to the secure attachment style really quick. What would you say percentage wise the amount of people on the planet are secure?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I think a lot of people are secure. And here's the here's the deal in dating. Secure people like to be in relationships. So I find that you more often encounter like avoidant people in the dating pool because the secure people are there and like relationships for them don't work out for many reasons. But then when they back into the dating market, they're the type who, when they find a good person, they are able to commit and in a new relationship, and then they're off the market again. Whereas you tend to see like the avoidance over and over because they really struggle in relationships. So that's why I think a lot of people struggle dating or like figuring out kind of these types. So I don't know the exact percentages, but I think like we feel like everyone's avoidant, but they're not. It's just that the secure people like being in relationships, and so do anxious people. So they like partner up, and then they're not on the market as frequently.
Yeah. And so I heard you say something, I loved your description of all the attachment styles. You made it, very clear. And would you say that there's a scale, like you could maybe maybe you identify more with being a secure attachment style, but then you maybe have a few avoidant tendencies, or you have a few anxious tendencies, and then you could be going, oh no, am I anxious avoidant? That's the one we haven't really talked about yet.
Right. And the anxious avoidant is ultimately kind of like having traits of like both the anxious and the avoidant. And so those are the hardest in the sense to like, you just have to really work through your stuff, like with a therapist, with a coach, like focus on this because you can heal and shift. But yes, we all fall on like a spectrum. And so if I'll do like an attachment style assessment with my clients, and some people check off like every anxious, question, but then also they have a number of secure, maybe like one avoidant, trait or quality, and we'll talk through it. And it's really important to understand, I mentioned this at the start, that like your attachment style can shift depending on your relationship experiences. So here's one thing. Maybe you go into a relationship as very secure, and then you fall in love with someone who's very avoidant. This isn't always the most realistic example, because if you're truly secure at the beginning, you won't put up with a lot of shenanigans. Like you won't put up with the emotional distance. Like you'll say, hey, you're being distant, I need more. And if they can't like meet your needs and work with you, then you walk away with your head held high because you're like not putting up with it. The thing I should mention about secure is they see other people's behaviors as an indication of their behaviors, not as like a lack of their own worth, a lack of their own value. People who are of a secure attachment style are very like, they just have a high level of worth, value, respect for themselves. So they're not likely to put up with a lot. But we fall in love.
They're not saying, oh, this must mean that, that's a reflection of me.
Right, exactly. Versus the anxious person they will think like someone's inability to love them is because like they're not good enough, they're not worthy, they have to do more, to earn this person's like approval or love. And so they really take it on as a reflection of a lack of like something that they're doing wrong. A secure does not. So here's just an example. Like if, you happen to fall in love with someone who is pretty avoidant and you're secure, over time, this person's like emotional distance or like, they like to like belittle, make fun of you, do little things to kind of cause distance. Like maybe over time that erodes some of your self-worth or self-esteem, and you start shifting a little more and more to anxious. Or maybe, I'm personally like, and I wrote about this in my book, Breaking Up and Bouncing Back. Like my big long-term like relationship with my ex, like he was definitely an avoidant, and I became very anxious in that relationship without at that time in my life, like knowing about attachment styles. And then when I started dating and met my husband, who is very secure, like it really helped heal my anxious style, because instead of like pushing me away, shutting down, ignoring, like he would validate my emotions, or he would make me feel secure, or that I could trust him. And that our communication was so good that I stopped like a lot of those kind of negative anxious tendencies, where I just felt much more secure, safe, dependable. One thing I tell my clients all the time is like, real long lasting love is unsexy in the sense that it's like dependable, safe, secure, reliable, consistent, like none of these big sexy adjectives. And of course there can be passion and attraction, but it feels very easy because there's all these like baselines of like really safe and secure adjectives. Versus when you're in an anxious avoidant relationship, there's a lot of high and lows, and you're like always fighting for those highs, and you kind of like are always trying to get back to that good place. And you have a hard time really seeing the reality that most of the relationship, there's disconnection, there's the pursue and avoid dynamic, and there can be a lot of drama.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you touched on something that's really important. I think oftentimes, if you're in this quest for love and it's been maybe challenging for you, that there's this, story that gets created, almost like Cinderella story that gets created in one's mind about, oh, it needs to be this and it's hot and attractive, all these things. But, exactly what you said, in a healthy relationship, the dynamic can feel kind of boring, but in reality, it's safe. It's life, and it's those, the insecurities oftentimes, or the anxiety that maybe it was created could be from childhood or a past relationship that caused some trauma, that can stir up the, maybe there's something wrong with this person, like those questions.
Well, yeah, I think you touched on a really important point. So what I spend a lot of time talking about with my anxious clients, and it could also be the avoidant, but the anxious ones, plus they're more likely to seek out help because they really want the closeness and intimacy. That I talk to them about how like their love barometer is basically broken. And so they're used to thinking and associating feeling excited about someone, feeling passionate, a spark, chemistry, feeling in love with someone. Like they associate those traits. That's really just your activated anxious attachment system. So things like, like constantly thinking about them and obsessing over them, like, spending all this time making the perfect text, wondering when they're going to call, dropping all of your plans to like at their beck and call to like get to see them. All of these different things that you think means, oh, I must really like them. That's actually just your activated anxious attachment system. And what happens is I find that a lot of these clients, when they do meet someone secure, they friend zone them, or they think it's too easy, too boring. They question if there's no spark, even though they're like, well, I think they're handsome, or, we have a lot in common, or we have good conversations, because in their head, they're like, wait, but I'm not on edge and I'm not thinking, about them all the time, because these secure guys are like literally following up at the end of dates and saying, hey, I want to see you again. So they don't have to actually question whether or not this guy is interested, or they text and call consistently, or they show up with like thoughtful gifts and they woo them and they court them and they pursue them, which we all like say that we want. But when we haven't had it, and then all of a sudden there it is, we don't know how to recognize ourselves in that dynamic. It's not that like it's too easy or that maybe he's boring. It's just that you're so used to being on edge, and all of a sudden now you can be calm, you can relax, you can receive, you don't have to like panic, and you just don't. That's like a completely new dynamic. And so a lot of times I'll see anxious people push away secure people early on. And my advice for them is like, recognize this, like that the love barometer is just saying, oh, I'm used to my activated attachment system, but hey, this is what maybe secure love or relationship feels like, and be a little patient. Because I think spark and like attraction and fireworks will come. I think they just come a little later as you begin to learn to date secure. But when you're used to dating secure, you fall in love really fast, you get attached really fast. It's like all hot and fireworks. And I warn my clients, I'm like, that's too much too soon. You actually, to me, it's a signal that maybe you're still activated and maybe dating someone avoidant. Like, let's slow it down. Let's see if you can get out of your own way to actually receive like that high quality love that you deserve.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, I love the way that you shared that, because it's, I hear this a lot from my anxious clients. They'll be like, there's, or they'll say something like, what's wrong with him? Is there something wrong with him? And there's not. It means that, it's also a really good measure that you're attracting differently too.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody that's anxious, and I mean, I would say let me ask you a question too around that. Would you say that more women tend to be anxious than men, or would you say that there's an even spread around that?
So I think that's a hard question to answer. I think I've worked with anxious men. I know they exist.
Yeah.
I think given like hookup culture, especially like college into early 20s, when like people are having kind of their first relationships or trying to get into like these committed relationships, and just how popular like this non-committal mentality is, it's really damaging. And I tend to find like I just encounter more women who are anxious because they're like, I'm looking for a commitment. And I think a lot of times men also, I think just like later in life, like I think women, maybe you've experienced this too, Cindy, but like I think like women can prioritize a relationship and are ready for love no matter like what's going on in their life, versus men are like, I want my career down pat. I want to know how much money I'm making. I want to get my first like apartment or house. Like they just kind of have this like blueprint, and then they feel like, okay, now I can like be a provider and take care of my partner in obviously like a straight relationship. But and so I think like you find men maybe seeking commitment a little later on than women do. And then I think that dynamic can also increase kind of those experiences that lead to the anxious attachment style of feeling like people aren't ready to commit, like they're playing games, they just want to hook up. So I think that absolutely, I've worked with anxious men, they do exist. I just think like part of it is like a cultural phenomenon that like leads to some of the anxious traits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, some women, we could arguably say have those feelings too. I want to have my life together. I want to have my, first apartment, house, whatever it is, too. But I can agree with you. It's just, it's interesting to, think about if we had a real survey around what all this is. And I've seen some statistics around it.
Yeah.
Seen that sometimes that men tend to be more avoidant. And I think it's if they are on the scale, but I think a lot of that also too is what goes on biologically with men as well, and just how they are, the difference between a man and a woman DNA wise.
Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting that I like to share too is there's been some like brain scan imaging studies that show that people with an anxious attachment style, they're less, the parts of their brain that show like emotional regulation and like self-soothing, like they're not as good at it. It doesn't activate the same way that someone with a secure or an avoidant does. So they like literally their brain is wired differently where they're not self-soothing enough. So these are the people who like until they hear from their partner, they're like really worked up or emotional and upset until they know that their relationship is safe, that everything is okay. And the research also showed that these people with the anxious style are also better and faster at detecting emotion in other people. And so they have that gut reaction when like they feel like someone's pulling away. It's because they probably are, and they're very sensitive, like hypersensitive to it, and they pick up on it really fast. And so like, one thing I talk to my anxious clients about too is like kind of working on some self-soothing strategies and like coping strategies so that their whole world doesn't like shut down when the person doesn't text back or when they're in an argument with their partner, because it can be more challenging.
Yeah, that is a really good point about the more highly sensitive or empathic type characteristic that many anxious people possess.
It's like the toxic dynamic is the avoidant is most likely to say, you're crazy. I'm not being distant. I was just busy. And they like gaslight, and they don't just say, you're right, I've avoided you because my feelings have changed, or because you're too much or you're too needy. And so they avoid it. And then if the anxious person actually addresses it, they're usually not met with like validation. They're usually somehow made to feel crazy or insecure or needy. And then it just perpetuates the cycle.
Right. It perpetuates them questioning themselves, then not feeling enough, and then continuing to make something work that is this dynamic of, basically stonewalling, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the, well, actually, I want to ask you first, because you mentioned self-soothing techniques, and I feel like this is so important for, women that experience that anxiety when it comes to dating and relating, and maybe life in general, and especially with this past year, it's created a lot of anxiety and many people. So do you mind sharing a couple of the techniques that?
Sure. And they can be really varied. I mean, first and foremost, I just talk to my clients about the importance of actually identifying how they're feeling. That's always the first step, because brain research shows that when you take the time to actually identify and label your emotion, something as simple as saying, oh, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling disappointed, like labeling the emotion that you're feeling internally, just the process of labeling it activates the brain regions that help regulate emotion. So instead of just like distracting and going about your day all busy, knowing that you feel crummy inside, or drinking some alcohol or whatever that you do to like avoid, just take some, a couple minutes to like sit, take a deep breath, tune into your body and be like, what am I feeling right now? And then you don't need to do anything like rash to change it. It's just strictly about identifying the emotion. So that's just like, it seems very simple or obvious, but we don't really take the time to do that. So that's just the very first step always. And then a lot of it, can kind of come down to self-care, or let's say like this happens all the time. Like I'll have a client maybe who's really anxious, who, whether they're in a relationship with someone or newly dating, they'll text like 5, 6, 7 times in a row and not hear back, or spend like the 2 hours crafting this perfect message and don't hear back right away, and like literally can't focus at work, can't do anything. They're just obsessing over what's going on in the relationship. So in that time, like calling a friend, go exercise does wonders for everyone for so many reasons. Activates your dopamine system and endorphins, makes you feel happy, less stressed. Like, so go exercise for a little bit, take a shower, like do something to kind of create time and space where you're not actively like reaching out to your partner. And then there was one other thing I was just going to say that's like very important. And of course my mind is going blank.
Why does that happen? I know.
I don't know, but it was like a third big one. If it pops back in, I'll tell you. But yeah, basically you don't want to reach out like when you're in that really heightened, anxious, like needy state where you just like want answers. Like that's not going to go very well. So if you can kind of bring your system into like a more neutral state where you're not as reactive and obsessed, that's a better energy to reach out from. Like I said, if I think of this third thing in my head, I will happily share.
It's great. I mean, that you show that exercise is so key. Getting out in the fresh air is important. Connecting with a friend. And I think too, I recommend this to my clients as well. It's, taking time to, did it come up?
Yeah, it did.
I was so cute. I was like, I heard it. I knew it came through.
You do it. Yeah. As a share, sorry to interrupt you, but before I forget it again, it's your world, especially early on in a relationship, should never revolve around this person. So make life about you. So if they text you, here's the thing. This isn't about playing games and like waiting, 3 hours to text them back or a day to text them back. If you're doing something when they text you, finish what you're doing before you text them back. So if you're at the gym and you're on the elliptical and you happen to see that they texted you, but you're like, on the elliptical listening to a podcast, finish your workout, finish your podcast, and then text them back. Like, stop dropping all of your plans your whole life. Or like, let's say you really want to see them and they haven't gotten back to you about plans, and your girlfriend asks you to like go out to dinner or, you know, do something with her. Go out with your girlfriend. And if he happens to ask you out for that same time, too bad, too late. You should have made plans with me before, but here's when I'm free and you can see me around on my schedule another time. So like, basically, world has to stop revolving around them. Prioritize yourself, finish your workout, finish your shower, like, do you, and then respond at your convenience. Which is very different than like playing games and waiting a certain amount of time. It's about prioritizing yourself and like making it work in your life on your schedule, rather than like bending backwards and catering to someone that you don't even really know yet or aren't in like a committed relationship with.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is such a good one. It's just making sure that you're prioritizing yourself in your life. And it's so interesting, you know, when I talk to my clients about that concept too, sometimes they'll go to, so then there's the pendulum, they'll go to the clear other direction. Well, I was really, really busy all day long and I didn't get to text him until 9 o'clock at night or whatever. And it's, you know, being mindful of that. Sure. And, you know, it's just, it's like, you know, in your brain, would you, you know, when would you respond to a girlfriend typically, or, you know, like treating it from that perspective rather than.
Yeah. And also like the secure perspective is like, you know, I'll be communicative and straightforward. I'm in a work meeting, like I'll have to text them after work. If I'm, you know, in my personal training session, I'll text them afterwards. So you're still being communicative and you're not spending so much time like overthinking like this perfect strategy of when you're going to do things. Like when you operate from your secure attachment system, you just do like what feels natural and communicative to you. So working on that, and it is, you know, and if you do want to text them and while you're still working it out, that's fine too. But really this idea, right, is like that you, are taking care of yourself and your own needs, and that you'll communicate with them. For the avoidant person though, who's only focused on themselves and their needs and their independence, it's really about kind of saying, oh, like, you know, someone's and this is what they struggle with, like, oh, someone's depending on me, or they're waiting on me to make plans, or they want to know like where I stand. And so you have to get outside of your comfort zone a little bit and really think, what is a teammate mentality? You know, what would I do as, I say, like a we factor versus a me factor. Me factor is like all about you and all about like your own individual needs. And that doesn't work in a relationship. You have to be a teammate and a we. So like, how can you kind of put yourself in your partner's shoes and like start communicating a little more consistently and more frequently? So I just like to clarify that, because the advice for the anxious would not be the same advice for the avoidant.
And that's a really good point to make. Yeah. Like, you know, and let's talk about the anxious avoidant. Let's touch on that really quick too.
Yeah.
What, you know, I know that can create a pretty toxic dynamic.
Yeah.
Would you share a little bit more about why it can be so toxic?
Sure. So I think that dynamic, first of all, these people, like the anxious and the avoidant, naturally very attracted to each other, like a magnet, hard to resist. And I think you have to understand the underlying framework is that it validates both people's like underlying beliefs about themselves, about how other people will treat them. So the anxious person who feels kind of unlovable, like people are going to leave them, that they're not good enough, they attract people who are non-committal, who are not great communicators, and who will ultimately distance themselves and leave them, or makes them feel too needy and insecure. And that feels familiar because that's the pattern since early childhood or different relationships that they've experienced. And it's like a different physical body, a different person every time, but the same like pattern and dynamic. And the same for the avoidant, who just feels like, you know, people are needy, they're too much, I don't like it when they depend on me, they're going to encroach upon my freedom. And then here we go, I meet an anxious who like feels great at first to be liked and it's flattering, but they're needy, you want too much from me, they're depending on me, so I'm going to distance myself. They don't have the wherewithal to be like, oh, my distancing is actually causing them to like pursue and try to close the gap and to be needier. Like if they actually just like modeled secure behavior, the anxious person would also model more secure behavior and like give them a little more space, or like the communicate, everything would just be easier if they both modeled the secure behavior. But it just validates their, framework that like people are too needy, they're too much, or also, feeling like they can only depend on, themselves. And so it feels familiar. And I think ultimately we kind of keep, like, we're always seeking a romantic partner who's going to like heal our kind of our childhood wounds, or these wounds of the past and these beliefs about us. But we end up like just finding that same person who like triggers us instead. And I think when you date,
it's the guide that wants to be healed, that triggers.
Yeah. Anyway. And so when we start dating secure and like modeling secure behaviors, it can be so healing, and we can actually like heal our attachment style. Like it gives us the safety we need to then also be like working on ourselves. We can't expect our partner to like fix us, complete us, but it can provide this really safe, loving, supportive base for us, so that we can also simultaneously be doing our own, work to heal and like understand ourselves. So when you kind of aim to date secure, even if you're really anxious or avoidant, if you're dating secure, like the secure person will like give you some space and not have a meltdown when you say, hey, I need some time to myself. Or the anxious person will be like, I need attention and I need you and I'm worried about you. And the secure person's like, I'm here, babe. I love you. Like, what can I do to make you feel better? So it just can like deactivate your system and help you model and step into the secure position.
Yeah. And that's, so can one shift their attachment style out of relationship? So let's just say you're single and you want to become, that maybe you're more anxious or more avoidant. Is it possible to do that outside of relationship?
I think it's definitely possible. It is more of like an intellectual shift where like you can listen to this kind of discussion, read about your attachment style, kind of like start practicing. When I say secure, like secure is ultimately all about like self-love, self-worth, self-esteem. So anything that you can be doing, and there's so many practices, right, to like build self-worth and self-esteem. But when you increase the relationship with yourself, when you have more value, respect, and love for yourself, the love you're willing to accept from other people also up levels. So like when you value yourself, you're not going to tolerate or put up with BS behavior, with non-committal people, with controlling people. Like you lose your taste for all of that. And so the work you're doing while you're single is really about like loving up on yourself, increasing your standards and your self-worth, so that you kind of lose your attraction for those other types of dynamics.
It totally shifts. All of a sudden it's like, oh, that's not interesting anymore. That feels dramatic, or it's sparking that anxiety within me. So it gives you the opportunity to pay more attention about what's going on inside. And ultimately, I feel like, as you're, adding dating in while you're doing the self-work is, the perfect combination to test.
Yeah. And it is. It's like dating, like the best thing about being single and then starting to date again is it's an experiment, and you're like collecting data, and you get to be a different version of yourself on every date, which is because you can like, let's say you feel really anxious, but you're committed to like modeling secure behavior. So you're really communicative about like your expectations when someone starts to pull away, or, maybe it'd be really hard for you in the past to be like, oh, I really like you. And like, I hope I can see you again. Like that might feel scary to someone who's anxious, who desperately wants it, but doesn't want to put someone away. So to like practice saying that and speaking your mind confidently, even though you don't know how to feel about you, and being vulnerable. So you can kind of practice these skills, even though it's outside of your comfort zone, but like every new date that you go on is an opportunity to experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And I know that you have now we're transitioning. I know you've got a gift for our watchers and listeners out there that they can get. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what they'll be receiving when they opt
Sure.
in.
So I'm offering viewers 75% off of my 12-week breakup recovery program. It's called Breakup Bounce Back. And that's really for people who have just gone through what I call like a soul-crushing breakup, or maybe you've been single for a while, but you can't truly like let go of your ex, or you feel like there's these old wounds that you're like holding on to. So some of this attachment style work, and it's really 12 weeks to kick that breakup in the butt, like cope, let go, and reopen your heart to love, so that you by the end, there's also like you've transitioned out of kind of the pain of your breakup, and you're feeling motivated, you've increased your level of self-worth, self-love, and you're feeling excited to date again. So it's really like a transformational program to walk you through those steps of healing from heartbreak, and then dating more confidently, and hopefully as a more securely attached dater.
Right. I love it. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
and we are posting that in the comment section, and as well, everyone that's opted in will get the opportunity to get the link for our generous gift.
yeah. Well, I just feel like, especially during a pandemic, like a breakup is already alienating and like isolating enough. My heart just like broke for all the people who are going through big breakups, especially with people they were like living with and together for a long time with, to just be so isolated and not being able to get out and see friends, or, you know, go out to eat at restaurants. I mean, everything. It just is such a difficult transition without being in a pandemic, that I was like, let me, you know, make this accessible. So I really, you know, for anyone who's struggling, you do not need to know how to get over heartbreak yourself. Like there is a whole like format and structure that I provide. So now is the time, especially during a pandemic, like you're not alone.
Absolutely not. Yeah. You're never alone. And you get the opportunity to really heal and process your emotions, and have, learn more different coping skills to have, healthy attachment in the future. So I thank you so much for being here, Samantha. This has been a pleasure. So much fun. I loved having you. And I know all the watchers and listeners are absorbing this and, appreciating all your knowledge and insight. So until next time, which will be shortly, you guys will see me all day. I'll be live streaming. And until next time, here's to you, and really opening your heart, and just congratulating you for stepping in, taking the time to listen and watch this information, ingest it, and, unhooking from anything that's holding you back from truly experiencing and receiving the love that you so richly are worthy of and deserve. So we'll see you all later, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.